Hello, good evening, welcome. I'm Henrietta Huldish. I'm Chief Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs, and I am just thrilled, as well as my colleagues, we're thrilled to have you here tonight to help us celebrate the opening of Suzanne Jackson, What is Love at the Walker Arts Center. Before we begin, I would like to ground us by acknowledging that here in Minnesota, Makoche, we are gathered on Dakota and Ojibwe land. Walker staff and trustees are in active relationship and dialogue with Indigenous community members, with citizens of Native nations, working towards making a strong and healthy place for artists, the arts, and this area. It's my great pleasure to acknowledge the generous supporters of Suzanne Jackson, What is Love? This exhibition is co-organized with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and on behalf of both partners, I would like to express our deep gratitude to the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, who supported this project from the beginning, helping us organize, present, and tour this exhibition to several places. We have many close friends to thank for their support, for supporting the presentation here in Minneapolis. The Walker is incredibly grateful to have lead support from John Gabbard and the Room and Board Foundation Exhibition Fund. We're also deeply grateful to the Pohlad family, thanks to Walker trustee Charlie Pohlad and his husband Jack Carter for their support of this project, as well as many others. We're also deeply grateful to Walker trustee Laura Taft and her husband John. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Walker trustee Carlo Bronzini-Vender, Walker trustee John Christakis and his wife Deb, and Walker trustee Susan White and her husband Rob. We are just so grateful for your generous support of this exhibition, and really for all of your support and what you do, enabling us to do what we do. I mentioned that this show was a co-organized show between the Walker and SF MoMA, and I would like to acknowledge the whole co-curatorial team that worked on this. Jenny Geith, the curator and interim head of painting and sculpture at SF MoMA, Oriel Gaza, curatorial assistant of painting and sculpture at SF MoMA, as well as our touring partner, Claire Howard, the Hans-Jörg Wyss curator of modern art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so happy you could be here. And of course, I want to acknowledge the Walker curatorial team, Taylor Jasper, the Susan and Rob White associate curator of visual arts, and Walker curatorial fellow Laurel Rand Lewis. What is Love is really an extraordinarily beautiful, generous, and inspiring show that traces Suzanne's lifelong dedication to beauty as a political force. This is the first and really long overdue museum retrospective that's devoted to her career. It charts 6 decades of work, highlights her virtuosic work across many, many media, including poetry, dance, and theater, but really, of course, first and foremost, painting. If you haven't seen this stunning show, you'll have a chance to do that after the talk. The galleries are open till 9 p.m. tonight. And now I'm really just thrilled to welcome Suzanne herself, joined here tonight by Taylor Jasper, the co-curator of the show. You will find bios of the 2 speakers with more detail in your program notes, so I will not read them here. And instead, I will just say, please join me in welcoming Suzanne Jackson and Taylor Jasper.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name's Taylor Jasper, and I'm the Susan and Rob White Associate Curator here at the Walker Arts Center. Thank you all so much for being here for this opening day conversation between me and Suzanne on the occasion of the opening of her retrospective, What is Love? Suzanne, I'm so happy to be here sitting with you today. One of the things that I feel like this show makes really clear is that your practice has always been really expansive. You've been a painter, a poet, a dancer, a scenic designer, but through all of those forms, you've continuously returned again and again to painting. So across the exhibition, we see you asking what painting can hold, like beauty, memory, grief, and more importantly, that love here is not sentimental or simple, but rigorous. So today, what I was thinking is I'd love for us to move through 7 works together from some of your most recent suspended acrylic paintings, and back to earlier works from the late 60s and 70s. So I'm thinking, hopefully, not just a chronology, but we can reveal a set of recurring questions in your practice about surface, spirit, abstraction, figuration, and what beauty can make possible. So to begin, we can talk about Palimpsest Grid, which is a work in the Walker's collection, which is near the end of the exhibition's chronology. The work was made between 2022 and 2023. And this work really just shows how far you've pushed painting beyond the canvas. So it's not just painting on a canvas substrate, but it's also surface, structure, body, and environment. And so I'm wondering how this work brings together ideas that have moved through your practice for decades.
I think you said surface, spirit. I was trying to remember that. What was
Abstraction,
Abstraction,
figuration, and
yeah.
what beauty can make possible.
Yeah, but I was thinking something you said earlier with spirit and surface and space. This piece, Palimpsest Grit, was a challenge piece. I was annoyed by people saying, "Oh, these works you're making can't possibly exist. They're, how strong are they?" And they need time. The works need time. This is an experiment in the sense that I was working with structure, and I love architecture. So working with architectural structure, working with form, without using any armature, but then building armature through the paint for the strength of the paint, and also challenging myself to see how strong I could build this image, this piece, using all sorts of, I was challenging the idea of acrylic paint being surface, being the context, being the surface, being the subject, being everything in itself, being sculptural in the sense that it's, the works are dimensional, they're double-sided, but also the strength of the paint. Oil paint is known to take years to dry. When acrylic paint was introduced, it was introduced that, this is a paint that dries in 20 minutes. It dries in 20 minutes on the surface, but it takes time to dry in the under layers. And because I work in layers and layers and layers, each of those layers has to dry. Sometimes I will allow the layers to dry before applying the next layer. So this piece is a challenge for me in working with strength, working with the materials at hand. The upper area, I used a frame from those rolling clothes carts that we have, those portable carts that we use. I find things around the studio. I don't like to throw many things away. I find that as opposed to putting things in the dumpster, everything can be used again. So in this piece also balancing the center part of the structure with a board, using string for tension, there's a piece of silk in the upper layer. It's a beautiful piece of raw silk that I was punishing myself saying, should I put this gorgeous piece of silk in this painting? But I thought, no, it's beautiful, it's strong. And so in these levels of the painting, from the very top to that silk level, that creamy level, to then the acrylic paint in layers, very strong layers, and then the string as tension, and that string on the sides, really the string and the rope are areas of tension. And I remember when I was in undergrad in college, we're given an assignment to take a piece of string and a piece of paper and to make a shelter. And that was it. That was not an easy assignment because how do you attach those things? How do you make that tent stand up, that structure stand up? So in a sense, I was working in the same way with Palimpsest grit, and then using string throughout, using twine as texture and form within the piece. The side sections in the lower half are braided rope, and sort of loving that idea of the braid from twine as strength. And then all of these parts are actually embedded or, acrylic paint as the ceiling structure, the glazing structure in the work. So the painting is sealed with the acrylic, but it is also built with the acrylic in layers and layers and layers. This painting, and then in the lower section, I actually had a piece of canvas that I wanted. I love to work with graphite, and I'd started a drawing on that piece of canvas. And I was thinking about how sometimes the painting, the acrylic will keep growing and growing and growing. And according to the temperature in the room, whether it's very warm or very cold, then that's how the piece is living. These are actually living structures, living paintings. So they move, and as you move throughout the exhibition, some of the works will actually move very slightly in the room with you. This lower section with the canvas has little drawings that are actually for the children. Children see things that adults don't see. So they're hidden in the structure of that lower piece of canvas, which also is like a band that holds this piece so that it doesn't start to droop and move. So that within this piece, there's a lot of tension and structure and pull from the string and the paint. And then there are layers and layers and layers of paint. This painting may not be dry until the next, maybe 5 years it takes to dry. Each time I've seen, for example, there's a large painting, the ocean painting, that has traveled from Glasgow to Milan, to the Whitney Biennial, to San Francisco, and now it's here. And each time I've seen it, it has dried so that the clear areas are almost like glass. But the paint is still very flexible. So it's not hard like glass to crack, but it is very flexible and very soft and strong. So that's part of the challenge of Palimpsest grit, was because I was sort of mad. And I wanted to say, okay, I can make really strong painting, and I'm going to show you that I can do this. So, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, just considering this kind of like formal conversation about your work, the hanging acrylics, the work from this period, are really, they're open, they're porous, they're exposed, they're kind of atmospheric. And so what does suspension allow you to do that the wall does not?
Well, first of all, the reason the paintings are hanging from the ceiling is because in my studio space, I needed to do something with the pieces that I started working on the table, and then I will hang them up to work upright. But then after a point, there were several paintings that I needed to put someplace. So I started hanging them from the ceiling, and I could work both ways, on the table, on the ceiling, but also in the studio. I think there's a photo of me that looks as if I'm in a cave of paintings, and it's because of the space. The tables that I work on are about 96 by 96 inches, and then there's not that much space around the outside edges of the studios that I have. So it was a way of hanging them, but also to look at paintings from both sides. And also the double-sided nature of the paintings. One side may be very peaceful, very beautiful in my eye, or to someone else's, and the other side might be rough or plain. And so it's to give the viewer the opportunity to have two different ways of seeing or having a different experience, moving around the painting in the way that you have with three-dimensional sculptures that sit on the ground. But these are taking space. And now I'm thinking how as a dancer, especially being on the stage and thinking about the space and how it would move across the space in the air. In the sense, those paintings move in space, and they're not just attached to the wall. There are some paintings in this exhibition that are double-sided, but the way they've been hung, they're easy to read the texture. For me, some of the paintings I haven't seen, some of the older paintings I hadn't seen for 50 years, but the newer paintings, I have to look at them again. And in this exhibition, I can actually walk up and see what I've done. Sometimes I forget what I've done in the paintings, and the texture is really, as the paintings become drier, the texture and color grows and becomes much more translucent, much more beautiful to me. So that's the experience I'm having. Some that are closer to the wall, they are double-sided paintings, but you can see that they could be hung both ways and still be able to see the back sides of them as well. It's a different experience.
Thank you. So moving, just kidding. Okay. So moving forward to another suspended work. This one's called A Hole in the Marker, Mary Turner, 1918. Mary Turner was a Black woman in the early 20th century whose husband was lynched, and after speaking out against it, she herself was subsequently lynched as well. And so this work brings beauty into direct contact with historical violence. And began with a figure that, as you've said before, kind of disappeared into the piece. And so how did this kind of luminous, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. How did this luminous kind of form come to be out of those things?
Well, originally I was in the piece Saudage. There is a figure that I'd started working with, but in the piece Saudage, there's a figure that I'd started, but it's a little bit more rough and because of the way the paint was folding and falling. So in this painting, I was attempting again to try to put the figure into a long, narrow element, but it disappeared in the layers that I was adding. And I was also mixing bag netting, produce bag netting, from vegetables. I used that as a way of strengthening or holding the acrylic in places. And then, of course, I either read a story about Mary Turner, and somehow this piece evolved into being about Mary Turner and the layers of luminous color and gold just developed. The painting has been worked and reworked several times, restructuring it and building it because it started to grow. It grew about 14 inches from the original beginning of the painting. So that was another challenge of learning how to strengthen the painting, strengthen the body of the work, to hold the paint, and to be able to be suspended. And this is another double-sided piece. I love the way it's hung in the corner because it also gives another aspect of what the meaning of the painting became. I did not know this story when I started working on the painting. Several of the paintings, like Ebenezer, Crossing Ebenezer, I did not know that story. I've moved to the South, and I've learned so much about our history in the United States. As it turns out, I did not know in the catalog, Kelly Jones knew about Mary Turner and the piece of sculpture made by I'm coming about forget her name. The sculptor who did the WPA figures of the harp, Augustus Savage?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Augustus Savage in 1918 was alive and knew about this incident. She has a piece of sculpture that I did not know about, had not seen, and last year when they had the Harlem Renaissance exhibition, her piece of sculpture is about this tall, about 24 inches tall. It is narrow, and it is gold.
And that was just kind of really an odd experience for me because I knew nothing about either the theme of the title of the painting and Mary Turner or about the sculpture that was made by Augusta Savage. And she's one of my favorite sculptors. But I just had not known. Digital media has sort of helped us to see things that we don't learn in school when we get the iconic images in the art history classes, especially in the 60s when I was in school, in art school, or in art classes. So this piece has evolved in the sense that it's much stronger. It has a metal bar at the top. The whole refers also, in the story that I read, a woman, contemporary woman, was out with her son, and she was looking at monuments around Georgia. And when she found the monument, and this is in the 2000s, the Mary Turner monument, it was littered with bullet holes that were new. So that hole in the marker became the title of this piece, referencing our contemporary situation.
And current events, the state of the world, continuing to find beauty amidst the madness is like something that's very important to you and has stayed with you throughout your practice. Sorry, go ahead.
So even this piece is quite beautiful when you look at it. If you don't know anything about it and what the meaning is, it still is shimmers, and each side is actually different. And you've turned it around and used the other side, the opposite side, that some other institutions have used when they've shown it. So, and this side has more of the marbling and the color that runs through, and some of the texture is seen in this piece. So it's very stable now. What year is it? It's 2020. So it's had 5 years to dry. and 6 years almost. So I think this piece is pretty solid. It's dried pretty much. So you can see the difference in the timeline. And I'm still persistent about this. The works I'm now also not letting pieces out of the studio until a year later, so that I can look at them, rework them if I have to, look at the quality of the strength of the pieces, any places because each time, according to the weather, in Georgia and Savannah, it can be very hot, but it's also humid. When I moved to the studio up north in the Hudson Valley, it's cold, and the work really almost freezes into a strong shape, which is another positive aspect for the works. So I'm working in different temperatures. I was just in Brazil, and the temperature and the way to work with the work was quite different there. So I'm still experimenting and still trying to find all the ways to find the structural strength in the pieces, in each piece.
So prior to these environmental abstraction, prior to the suspended acrylic forms that you've been making for like the last 25 years, you were working a lot differently materially. In this work, 9 Billy Mingus Monks was a real turning point for you in your practice in terms of, correct me if I'm wrong, a real turning point for you in your practice in terms of bringing work off the wall and suspending it in midair, seeing it in the round. And the work is dedicated to Billie Holiday, Charles Mingus, and Thelonious Monk, artists that are connected to what you call African American classical music, or more commonly referred to as jazz. So how did jazz shape the making of this work? And I mean like less inspirationally than I do like compositionally, like when you think about improvisation, cadence, things
I
like
probably wasn't thinking about any of that when I was working on it. I start working on pieces and putting the paint. These works came out of working with bogus paper, which is and it's not the bogus paper that you can buy in the art store, the nice little sheets. This is the really strong recycled paper that's about 109 inches that's used in theater to put down on the floor and paint the sets on the bogus paper. And originally, when I was working in St. Mary City, Maryland, at the theater there, the school, the tech director would just ball it up and throw it into the dumpster. I had no supplies at that time. So I pulled it out of the dumpster, and in this piece, they're crumbly kind of shapes that I love. And there's also a little drawing that I love that is all sort of crumpled, and I work the oil pastel in that drawing into the creases and the lines of the work. So quite often my work is also about line. I love drawing, and there are different ways to look at line. Line can be in a crease, line can be something that's put down with graphite or pencil or a mark or with a paintbrush. So there are different ways to make line. And that's another one of those experimental kind of things that I'm working with. And in this one, you're seeing both sides. There's a tiny little bit of acrylic at the bottom of this. So that was the first experiment to see what could happen with the acrylic medium hanging in itself on its own. From the bottom of that piece. And this piece was in the corner of my studio for years. It seems, what year is that, 2003? It seems like it was up longer than that, but it was just in the studio, and I thought sort of gathering dust in a way. But I was also watching that piece of acrylic at the bottom to see what would happen. And I think I was using just an acrylic medium, not the gel medium, and watching whether it would yellow, how it would age, and how strong it would be. I may have gone back into it a couple of times later with the gel medium just to strengthen it and to solidify the piece. But the center part at the top was actually probably a piece of Stonehenge, and it looks as if these were parts and pieces of drawings or paintings that I may have started at different times. I have to see it up there, and working. And I don't call it my work is not collage. I call it assembled, and assembled in the same sense as if you're making sculpture and adding, as if you're adding clay pieces onto clay, adding metal strips onto metal strips. So this was an experiment. The top part, I believe, is that a piece of, it may be canvas stretched over wood, stretcher bar, and adding on. So I was really experimenting with shapes and materials. I love papers. This is 2003. At the same time, I had a fellowship to make monoprints. So that in experimenting with the monoprints, there were different kinds of papers, Japanese papers, and making prints on plexiglass and on stone was one of my first experiences and making 8-foot prints. So a part of that this piece comes out of that excitement about papers that would come in packages, papers that would come, newspapers. I actually bought large amounts of wild rice from Minnesota, and it would come with all kinds of advertising and papers. I could tell whether it was a gun guy or from the newspaper ads, or whether it was someone, a farmer. So I would get the newspapers from different packages, and then the packages that would come from Asia would have really fine, beautiful papers. So I've become fascinated with the quality of paper, whether it's low quality or high. And then some of the beautiful Japanese papers, the gampis, and we experimented with those. So that's how I began working with the bogus papers that are very strong, can be squeezed, can be sculpted into shape, and painted and solidified and made permanent with the acrylic and with the mediums. And I guess I can't remember. I keep trying to find what the 9 was. I've forgotten. And then, as it turns out, not this piece, but I was in an exhibition, the faculty exhibition, that went to Eastern Europe and toured in the museums there. And there were 9 of us. And I think they used this piece in the catalog. So it was sort of coincidental that it was 9 of us faculty, and it was the same. But this painting had the title 9 first, and I still have to remember why it was 9.
So obviously, engagement with material is very important to you. You've always expanded and experimented with material over the course of your career. But earlier today, you were saying that you don't like the word materiality.
It's a new word. And maybe because I was principally self-taught, and my first art classes were in college when I came to go to college at 17. And there were no syllabi. There were master teachers, artists. In the advanced studios, we worked as peers. We were just in studio all day long. We'd be in a life painting and drawing studio, or we'd be painting from the still life. And it was, I guess, in a sense, we were being exposed to what it is to work in the studio. So that's all I knew when I graduated from college. But although in college, I had a painting major, so-called, but it was actually art. It wasn't painting, because art was ceramics, photography, sculpture, everything. So it was art. And then I had a theater minor, which also was a dance minor. So I was actually painting, dancing, acting, doing all those things at the same time while I was in college. I had a good prep education. So it was really, and I was very young coming to college. The average age at San Francisco State at that time was 33, and I was 17. So it was a big experience to learn how to be in the studio and just work. And that's all I knew. So when I left college, that's what you did. You did not get a master's degree. There was no such thing. Right. And did I answer your question? Was that?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, okay.
Your turn.
I have to riff sometimes. It's part of the music.
No, it's great.
That word jazz is the dirty word to the musicians, the real musicians, and it was originally not a good name. So that's the reason we have coined African American classical music, which comes from blues and from the original people, the spirituals and people who worked in the fields, the songs. So that rhythm also is in the work and the improvisation of that. And I collect a lot of the blues, the old blues that I hear from Mississippi and the old singers that are part of the rhythm in the work. And I think that's something that I'm beginning to really want to talk about more in my work, that relationship to the music. Many of the African American artists and, the Native artists, Asian, all of us work in our culture. Everybody works in your own culture and your own music and spirit that goes with it. And that rhythm is in the work, no matter where you come from. It's that rhythm that you know. And I think it's the pace that we work in the studio. And that's what I learned in college. And then that all I should do was to get a studio. I should have a studio and work. So that's the reason by the time I moved to Savannah, Georgia, I'd had 15 studios. And it was number 15 was the studio I moved into. But it's sort of settled now. But it's hard when your intention is just to work and not to. We did not get degrees, MFA degrees. As I knew it, I came out of the mid-20th century. It's a different way of thinking. It was to become an artist was not about teaching necessarily, and many of my teachers didn't have MFA degrees. They had experience in the arts and in the profession.
Thank you.
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, continuing this conversation about spirit. So in the 90s, this work was made between 94 and 98. Your material remains very experimental. And the figure, which kind of removes itself or abstracts itself a little bit more later, remains very spiritually charged. Mm-hmm. Maya's part of the Water Spirit series. It pays tribute to the Yoruba goddess Maya. And so I was wondering at this moment in your life and practice how you were thinking about the figure as a kind of vessel for spirit, and what did water allow you to explore in this series, the Water Spirit
And you
series?
brought up the word material again, and I realized that I skipped materiality, didn't I? But
No, you were talking about it.
okay, but also I realized the reason I skipped it was because the spirit you're talking about here is not, and water is another. It is, water is spirit, and it's not materiality or things. I think materiality for me is makes the relationship to things and stuff that you use to make something. So it's that vocabulary that we did not have or didn't use when I was learning. So in this piece, I was in the transition from working in theater and drawing every day. And as you're working scene to scene, you're drawing the characters and you're drawing them in every aspect of the performance. So I was drawing a lot, drawing, every day and working through a scene that may have 100 characters through. But then here I was painting and I also working with limited amount of supplies. So this piece is in 2 sections and also narrow shape of paper. Here, and you were asking about composition before, I was really annoyed by the fact that the limitation of the paper and the size and scale was sort of really ruining the composition of my figure, the arms being askew. I was thinking this is a rather awkward piece. But I had to work on this and work on this and working on the shapes and the luminescence and also the proportion of the figure to the space that I was using. So I'm sounding very structural about this, even pieces of paper and working on it. This is a challenge when you have a limited number of materials to work with as an artist, when you're between lives. So this was between theater and between trying to get back into painting again. So, the drawing experience of having to draw every day, drawing through every scene, drawing the architectures, drawing the human form, acting and drawing out each scene all the way through with the actors in the scene. So this was, someone thought of it as a costume design. It was not a costume design. It was really that. It was part of that Water Spirit series. There's another painting that is more developed in the sense that also the acrylic paint was changing. And as you go through and you see my work, you'll see, well, in this you'll start with the newest work and then go back, but you'll also see the progression of acrylic paint from just plain gesso and simple color, and then the addition each decade of new mediums and new luminous paints and iridescent paints. So this was that period I was also working to get beyond just putting down washes and blooms and the watercolor effect on the original paintings, where I was working with layers. There's 150 to 200 layers on some of those really soft-looking paintings. But I was wanting to also work to get that effect sometimes that oil paint has, where there's the texture. I think in 2003, I was in Europe for a Biennale, and there was a painting there where it looked as if the acrylic paint was about 6 inches deep off the surface of the canvas. And that was very exciting to me. I don't know how that painting holds up now, but I was interested in the texture and the way the problem with acrylic paint as we use it is that it's very flat. It flattens when it dries. That's what when you're teaching, you teach, okay, you're going to put the color down and it's going to flatten as it dries. So I'm trying to go beyond that flatness by mixing some of the color, overlaying the color. And this was one of those experiments with working with the luminous color and the layers of iridescence that's natural in nature. I was told at one point, those colors aren't in nature. And so my response was to say, look at a dewdrop in the morning. if you're walking on the grass, there's always all those beautiful luminous colors in a drop of water in the morning in the garden, on the grass.
That's so poetic and lovely. I'm going to look at some dew tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
So another work made during the same period as Vivian on East 14th
yeah.
Street, but it feels extremely different. It's like more raw. I could almost describe it as like urban or kind of unsettled. And you started in Oakland and finished it in Savannah. And so I'm wondering both how portraiture functioned for you during this period of transition, or again, engagement with the figure. You don't have to call it portraiture. Or how moving to Savannah or the South, if you can speak a little bit more about how that changed the way you thought about or what you brought into the work.
Well, this was from an actual experience meeting a woman on the street who I didn't have very much money, and she was obviously hungry, and I just bought some Portuguese rolls, and so I gave her one. But I realized that she didn't have teeth to eat, so I gave her some extra change for coffee. And then when I went home, and I had only this really thin drawing paper, it was almost like shelf paper. It was so thin, but this was an immediate reaction to meeting her in Oakland, in the street, at the bus stop, and I gave her the flowers. The extension of this was in Georgia when I finally rolled this up and took it with me. I found in the back garden house of my building, I was finding all sorts of things that actually were historical. I was finding needles from the women who weave baskets in the back. There's a clothesline that was left over from the people who probably worked in this house. It's a big building, double house. So I was finding all sorts of things in the backyard. What I found were these coffee bags that were like burlap bags. And that was the way to back this painting to make it stronger, because there's no way it would have survived on this really thin paper with the graphite and the oil bars that I was using with the acrylic. So it was a drawing that just happened very spontaneously. So moving to Georgia, then of course I was influenced by the fact that nasty, dirty Atlantic Ocean has all kinds of stuff in it. It's not like the Pacific Ocean or even like the Mississippi River up here. It's flowing and moving. I was used to moving water. So that began to really influence, and also the trees and the low country landscape. And I could hear spirits. You can hear spirits in the trees and in the moss. The landscape there really speaks to you. And you're from Virginia, right? You know that.
I am.
Yeah. You hear the history in the landscape, and you can hear it here also. Each place that I've lived in the United States, I can hear the history in the landscape and in nature. You can see it, and I think that's really worth preserving for us all. So this was just another one of those transitions. And also when I was teaching at Savannah College of Art and Design, I loved the figure drawing classes, figure and painting, and we would sometimes have sessions with faculty and students, which would be wonderful, just working together, with drawing and painting. So that was that transition also from theater, where I'd been working, drawing every day, and then teaching drawing, and then going into my studio. I don't know how I managed to get all the work done that I was getting, working 24/7 and probably sleeping and painting at night, not sleeping and painting at night. But it was a pleasurable time because no one was paying attention to me. So I could just paint and experiment with the new environment, within the new environment, where I was also learning a history of the United States, learning a history even about my own family that I did not know. So it's been an experience to be in the South. and I have to say this, coming from California, coming from the Pacific Rim, and moving to Georgia, the experience I know, and I have not, I met Cara Walker when she was a baby, when she was 2. Her dad curated my first solo exhibition. And she was a baby on the floors, saying, I need something. Well, they moved to Georgia, and they moved right under Stone Mountain. So I understand the experience, the culture shock from California, from the West Coast, from the mid-United States, and you go to the southern United States, and I just saw some works of hers downstairs. The experience, the culture shock is real. When you move from very cosmopolitan, many languages being spoken, and then you move to a part of the country where everything is black and white. And then you learn some of the history. So I appreciate her work very much, and I have not met her in person since she's been an adult, but I understand the experience, and that's what's happened to me, where it's still a matter of culture shock, of learning the history, and learning how people understand and misunderstand the relationships with one another.
Okay, so just finishing up with one last work. So this is In a Black Man's Garden. And this work really was very large for you at the time. And I'm wondering what changed for you when intimacy gave way to this kind of monumentality.
I had a 5,000 square foot studio space. That's what made the difference. I could make paintings as large as I wanted. At one end of the block was the living space, and at the other end of the block was my studio. And with tall ceilings, my very first studio was on Temple Street for $40 a month underground, under a Victorian house with dirt floors. And I had to put a parachute on the ceiling so the people upstairs, the kids wouldn't throw pebbles down at me in the basement. So this studio then, and this was after the beautiful space I had in the Granada buildings that became Gallery 32. I moved to San Francisco and then moved back to Los Angeles because I was taken to this studio to meet these people who owned it, and they were ready to move. And this is where all the large paintings were made on large canvases. And I was able by this time, because I was being represented by Ankrum Gallery, which was a really good gallery in Los Angeles. They took my work on consignment in 1968, and by 1972 I had a solo show there. So they also helped me. The rent, you don't want to hear it, was $150 a month for that space. So I could afford to move with my son, and the gallery helped me to pay rent as well and pay expenses because they were were able to sell my work. It all balanced out. This piece at the time, was the largest painting in 3 sections, and at that time I was also able to have my stretcher bars built by the same stretcher bar maker that was building for Billy Al Bankston and Sam Francis, all the big guys in Venice. I realized it was important to have a good structure that I was working on canvas and having them built well. We had to learn to build our own when I was in college. We had a saw, and we learned to make a miter box and a hammer, and we built our own. Then we bought our canvas from the sailmakers. So this was sailmaker canvas that I'd bought and brought to Los Angeles. And then I had the stretchers built for me. This has now been rebuilt. The stretchers were rebuilt. A woman who was a collector in Los Angeles bought all 3. And this painting was found she had one section in her house, but the other two were still wrapped for over 50 years, and they were in the garage. And the garage was overgrown, and it was found by the gallery, by Orchesar. And so it was kind of a treat, because this was a big statement for me at the time, to have that much space to work on one huge, triptych, and to be able to express some of what, at the time, I was also doing research on inherent retentions of blacks in the Americas. So I was learning about African art. I was learning about the spiritual art that came with us from Africa through the Americas. And that's really sort of the basis for some of my images. It's not just the beauty and political beauty, but also part of our history, part of everyone's history, and our relationship to nature, our physical nature, relationship to nature as one. We are one with it, and that's very important to me. So this was also another way of, and Los Angeles actually had, I was living in Los Angeles then, the landscape is not what people thought. There's beautiful architecture there. There's high desert and low desert in that city, and magnificently beautiful plants that have grown now, very large. There were little bushes and things, and beautiful little things that the people thought were weeds, but they actually have become these really sort of, there's just different ecological environments that I'm really interested in. And in the desert environment, the high desert, mountainous areas, and partly because I grew up in Alaska where there were different ecosystems as well. So a lot of my painting is really related to those systems that we live in nature. And that's all I'm going to say, because we're going to run out of time.
I was going to say, yeah, we are going to run out of time, and I want people to be able to ask questions. So maybe we should open it up for Q&A now.
Okay.
Is someone running?
No questions?
No questions?
Oh, well,
Anyone
there's
have
a question there. Okay.
I was just wondering, you've worked with so many different materials. Is there any material that you aspire to work with?
I'm looking at possibilities. While I was just in Sao Paulo, I actually made some oil bar paintings on marble fragments. And I've heard that the only person who's done that is Bryce Marden. And I also have a piece on a metal vent, air vent. That's a sculptural piece that sits on the floor. So I've drawn and painted on both sides of that. It's a double-sided piece as well, with a little brick, rusted brick out on it. So I'm working with whatever materials I can find that are kind of strange and funky, maybe, and weird. So and I'm not interested so much in new plastics and stuff and vinyls. Although I did have some vinyl on the table there that would not release the acrylic. So I now have to see what I can do with those pieces. But I'm interested in any kind of fragments and pieces of construction, demolition that can be reused and not thrown into the dumpster and made beautiful.
That's fantastic. And where's your next studio going to be?
Where's my next studio? Actually, I'm still working on construction of the two that I have, which is more than enough.
Thank you so much.
They're in demolition right now, and I'm missing all the stuff they're throwing away, which is really hurtful. And there's...
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have two questions. One is about legacy. What do you want to be known for when you're not here anymore? And my second question is, about violence. And when you showed that piece about the lynching, I was struck by the beauty of it instead of the trauma. And I'm still processing that, but you know, I've seen pictures of lynched bodies and it's nothing pretty in
That's
it.
right.
But you were able to capture some beauty out of extreme violence. And I wonder how that happened.
There's another piece, which was an earlier piece, Crossing Ebenezer. Yeah, I think it's in the exhibition. I didn't know that story either. I was taken to the river, and it just looked like a big rushing river. And the person who took me was a surveyor and also a local person who was young, who should have known the history. I wasn't told the history. And then I read about Ebenezer Creek, which you'll read when you go to the galleries. So when I'm making the work, I'm not thinking about those things because I don't know them and I'm just learning in the whole process of making the pieces. I am not violent. I don't like violence. I don't like, and I think maybe this is my way of, when I talked about Thelonious Monk and Ugly Beauty, that music of his, that piece. And in a sense, this was traumatizing to me when I heard the story about Mary Turner. Even the violence that she was pregnant also at the time. So it was very hurtful. And it's part of what I've said. I felt such a calm here in Minneapolis, but I also feel kind of hurt inside. People, it's like, how do you come and hurt me when we have been good people, very calm, good place. So I think it's my way of wanting to give back. But I was just making the pieces. And then the trauma of the title came along that gives another essence to what the real story is, but also allowing people to see a part of our history that we may not want to know, but it is a part of our history. And it's part of my also learning and living, in the South. I think when the first part of your question, you were saying, about legacy. Well, at this point, I have a foundation that is to help other artists along the way and poets. And I have my buildings are part of the foundation, so those will be residencies for artists in the future. I thought about that differently when I was asked that same question earlier today or at another time. I want to be known as a painter. I'm a painter. I worked very hard to become a painter. Is a very innocent kind of way to talk about it. But also to have made images that are somehow helpful, whether you like the work or not. If you have a reaction or a response that you can't stand them, that's good. And if you love them, that's wonderful too. But at least some kind of reaction that responds, and relates to some aspect of your own lives, maybe, or someone else's. So it's for each person to experience. So, I'm being told that because I've lived in Savannah, that's the longest I've lived anywhere in one place, that I have a legacy and a responsibility there. But it's changing. Everything is changing. And it's not the same world that we've all known. So at this point, all I can do is leave some buildings that are going to be residencies for artists and the extra change, a little bit of change that will earn some interest that will help some artists out a little bit along the way.
I think maybe one more.
Hi, Suzanne.
There's a couple more, actually. Oh.
Is mic on?
There's
Hi.
a mic.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi.
This is Kelly Meister. I was your student 25 years ago at SCAD
Oh, my goodness. Hi.
in Savannah. And I'm just so pleased to see your work out, being appreciated by everyone. It's wonderful. And and very excited to see it here. And something I really learned from you, so many things actually, but was you're very environmentally conscious with how you work with the acrylic and the material and the water and the paint water and stuff. And I just wondered if you could talk more about your, you talked about your, reading and feeling the landscape. And I feel like there's something about that with your ecological sensibilities and your artwork. If you could talk a little bit about that, please.
I'm
Thank
curious
you.
what classes you had 25 years ago.
You were my advisor actually, but
Oh, okay.
but I had painting too with you.
Which one?
Painting,
Painting two.
yeah, painting
Oh,
too.
okay. That was a more advanced class.
Yes.
Okay, I have to try to remember. Kelly put the painting. I would not know the names of my students until I saw their work, and then I could put the work with the student, which was kind of a good way. So that's fascinating that you do remember that I also was very conscious about putting the paint water down the drain. We were also, very much, especially in the Savannah area, there are estuaries, and the landscape is really very delicate. And when I moved there, I was told that was the 6th most polluted city in the country, even though it's beautiful, because of the paper factory and the sugar factories. So just realizing that my plumbing could destroy the environment, I will not put any paint. I even brought back pigment water or the dried water from Brazil, so I wouldn't have to pour it into the environment there. Trying to save it or putting it on papers that I'm going to experiment with. So I just refuse to put any thing that I think can destroy the environment and our animals in nature. Does that answer the question? I'm still that way.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
was same way 25 years ago.
Of course, of course.
Thank you. Got one person here.
Hi. Thank you for this. I'm sorry I came in a little bit late, so I hope that I'm not asking you to repeat too much, but I really liked what you were saying about like the rhythm of the work and kind of like how each individual artist might find their own rhythm in creating. And you spoke about in different ways how spirit and nature are like one and the same and how they show up in your works. And I'm curious, you kind of answered this in your last question too, but or in your last answer as well, but how like spirit and nature show up in your process, like how you might be like communicating with them, if you're comfortable answering that.
I stare out the window a lot. I always have a window seat in an airplane, so I can watch nature and clouds. Clouds are fascinating, and I think about Georgia O'Keeffe's clouds, but you only see those over Chicago. Those are exactly those clouds over Chicago. And then since I've been here, I've been watching clouds because I'm on the 23rd floor, and watching how it clears out, watching nature, watching light. So watching light, and watching light especially in nature, how it changes in the days, in trees, how the light and the shadow changes. Those are all those simple things that, and I know I'm an artist of color. I'm supposed to think, I do think about all that other stuff. I don't want, it's really hard when every day you've got emails of political stuff going down, cramping up. But I try to turn that around to think, and maybe it's also the way I was taught and grew up, to make a positive from those things that are really destructive. And even for me, death doesn't seem to be a negative. It is a positive moving in the spirit. and a kind of recycling and composting and giving back in spirit. So when our ancestors transition and leave, they are also with us. So my experience in these past few years has been from my receiving spiritually. I also wanted to sort of, Mary Lovelace O'Neill was an artist that I loved her brushstroke. In 1972, we were in an exhibition together, and I fell in love with the way she painted, just very forcefully. And she was from Mississippi originally. She and Jacob Lawrence and some artists who are really tough in their work, and Richard Hunt. And Mary just passed away this week, so she was one of those people that I admired very much. And so that spirit in the work, and Mary, will be giving us a fighting blessing. She was a tough lady, but her painting was also tough. So I just wanted to also mention her because that's very special. Because last month when I had a show opening, it was Mel Edwards who passed away. So I feel like with these spirits come to us and give us gifts, we're always being protected by those people who are no longer here with us. Saudade. Saudade is about those memories that are positive, some of them are negative. We can't bring them back. They won't be the same if we bring them back. So it's this lovely memory. And we say saudade to people because we have a good memory of life and things that we have experienced.
Hi. I love to hear about how you approach structure in your work and how the mark enables stability, and stability also enables the mark, and like this symbiotic relationship between the two. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, are there any rituals that you find yourself returning to that have enabled stability in your practice, either between lives, like you were saying, or at this point in your career?
This is the third time someone's asked me about ritual in my work. I think, well, I get up in the morning and I feed the cats when I'm there. I have to go through the studio, and sometimes I don't get to the studio to get the coffee, and I climb the ladder, in my nightgown and work on the paintings. I don't know if those are rituals or not, but when the studio was intact, I'd have to come down and go through the studio, go to the kitchen, feed the cats, look out the window, stare. Those are, for me, any rituals I have, but not, I think, at one point 30 years ago, I was in meditation and doing my meditation exercises, and but when I started teaching, I stopped dancing. There was no time to dance. There was the meditation. It becomes another kind of a balance, which you learn. There's a constant meditation, looking out the window, looking at trees, breathing, being alive. And we have to be much more careful with ourselves and not so critical. So I'm very critical, self-critical quite often. So I'm learning now to try to be a little more relaxed. Everybody fusses me, the gallery fusses at me because they say I'm traveling and I'm every place all the time, everywhere. But I have the example of Betty Starr, who's almost 100 years old, and she was dancing last week at her celebration. So, and then a friend who's here right now who told me she's 95, and we thought she was only 60. So, I know a friend I hadn't seen in a long time, Jean Ann. So, that's to me is what people are asking about ritual and what's the pace and what do you do that are things to prepare you. But it's just breathing and life, for me anyway. Other people, I know other people may. And in New York City, people have to leave their studio, get on the subway, go to the studio. I have to live in where I work. So I'm always there. I can have to sleep with the work and keep the windows open. I work with acrylic because it's less toxic than oil. So, and also because I love it. It just flows like watercolor. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. This was
I
really
should say
wonderful.
thank you.